This time we will watch out for the revised estimates of FY23 as much as we watch for the budget estimates for next year FY24, because this year both taxes and expenses have been much more than what was budgeted last year. So here goes. The first number to watch out for will be what's the nominal GDP growth the budget assumes. Last year the budget assumed that GDP would grow by 11.1% to 258 trillion rupees. But it actually grew by 15.4% to 273 trillion rupees. This was, of course, because of inflation. Now, FY24, our poll of economists says government should assume a nominal GDP growth of 10% only, taking the GDP to 302 trillion rupees. Okay, now let's come to revenues. This year, that is FY23, net tax revenues were estimated to have grown by 18% by our poll, although the government had budgeted that it would grow by only 10%. For FY24, our poll says the government should expect tax revenues to grow in the same pace as the nominal GDP. That is, it should grow by 10% to about 24 trillion rupees. Now, to this, let's add the non-tax revenues like divestment and dividends. The total government revenue that our poll says we should expect is around 27 trillion rupees. Let's come to expenditure. Key heads to watch out for will be subsidies and capex. Subsidies were budgeted for FY23 at 3.2 trillion rupees, but because of the Ukraine war and food inflation, subsidies rose to 5.7 trillion rupees. That's according to our poll. But it will be trimmed to around 4 trillion rupees this year as the free food program has become smaller and fertilizer prices are coming down. Now, let's come to capex. Capex was budgeted to grow by 25% in the FY23 budget, last year's budget. For FY24, the government may budget that the capital expenditure should grow by a slower 15% to 8.7 trillion rupees. This number is important. The bigger the number, the happier the market will be. Total expenditure is seen by the polls to rise by only 5% to 44.5 trillion rupees or thereabouts. So expenditure 44.5 trillion rupees, revenue 27 trillion rupees means a fiscal deficit of 17.7 trillion rupees or 5.9% of the GDP. The deficit is by far the most important number. It needs to come down because interest outgo has been absorbing more than 23% of the government's total expenses for the past 3 years. 70% of the fiscal deficit is usually met by market borrowing. Now, bond dealers and bankers say they expect a net borrowing by the government of 11.3 trillion rupees through sale of bonds, a gross borrowing of 15.8 trillion rupees. Anything more than 16 trillion is going to scare the bond markets, can send yields surging.